Hey guys, welcome back to Ancient Lit Online. I hope you had a good weekend. Let's get right into what this week looks like. We are rapidly nearing the conclusion of Aeneid, which is exciting. By the last week of April, we will be starting Shakespeare, which is going to be a really cool change up of setting in terms of jumping ahead from where we are in history right now with Aeneid by about 1500 years and moving a little westward up to merry old England and talking about all of that kind of Elizabethan London and stuff like that. Okay, so we're going to finish book 10 for Wednesday, and then I'll have you read these pages from the first half of book 11 for Friday. I will pick either Wednesday or Friday to give you a quiz. You're not going to know which day it will be until we get to Wednesday. Yep, and I'll be sharing poetry all week. That is due on Wednesday, so I should be able to share the last poems on Friday and then maybe some on the following Monday. But yeah, my notes for today are pretty quick. I'm going to go over just the opening pages of book 10, and then you'll probably want to spend the rest of today's class time, quote unquote class time, either reading more of book 10 and finishing it, and or finishing your poem if you haven't already. But I have almost a third of the poems, maybe a little more actually. So I have a few poems to share at the end of this video. But first, let's do a quick student response corner. This is from a student. They just sent me in some thoughts they were having about the poem and the plot circa book 9ish. And it was just like really interesting. So, yeah, this is a good way to compensate for the fact that I don't get to hear your feedback like immediately. It's always mediated through Google Forms nowadays. Um, yeah, so if you ever want to write something, if you have like a thought where you're like, hey, Mr. Callowell is not like mentioning this thing that I'm picking up on that seems actually pretty interesting about the poem, please do share, guys. That is only going to make things more interesting for us. I might start putting little parts of the form in where you can just optionally talk about your take on a book or something. And then also, one last little point on that. My idea is that for next week, we will have a Zoom session to read the end of book 12. So maybe we'll read the first half on our own, but it'd be really cool, I think, to read the ending of book 12 via Zoom for those who can make that work. It's not too tricky to get it going, though I know some people might have technical issues. But anyway, we'll figure that out in time for next Monday. This student is saying that they are picking up on a lot of reversals, and that's a cool word to use because this goes back to an Aristotelian term, peripeteia, that we talked about briefly, but we never found super amazing examples of it. We see superficial reversals in Odyssey when Odysseus goes from being dressed up like a homeless person and a beggar to suddenly revealing that he is, in fact, the patriarch of that home, and he shows everyone up and starts, going crazy, punishing the suitors. And we sort of have a reversal in Oedipus, wherein Oedipus goes from thinking he is an innocent bystander who's doing everything he can to find and catch a killer to realizing that he is, in fact, the killer. But so, yeah, this student, it's like, I feel like maybe we've mentioned noticing this a little bit, but they are picking up on a whole lot of things. So I might not read this all. If you want to pause it and go through these points, that would be great. But they're saying that essentially the Trojans have now become the Greeks. If we think of our initial paradigm, so yeah, paradigm, by the way, is just this overly fancy word for the way things are, kind of in a broad sense. So our initial paradigm back during Iliad, during the Trojan War, is that the Trojans were the defenders and the Greeks were the invaders. Whereas now, in the Aeneid, during this Italian Civil War, the first of many, many Italian civil wars that'll actually occur historically, the Trojans are very much the invaders, which is, not what they wanted to be. Initially, they were not. They talked to King Latinus and they were being friendly and everything's fine. It was only when the gods meddled. But they did kind of have a hand in it too. Ascanius shot that stag on accident, which does make it a little more grounded in their actual agency as human actors who, are responsible for their own actions. But anyway, and now the Rutulian/Latin people are the defenders. And we even use that terminology in the poem, a new Achilles, which that tries to make it to where the Rutulians are still the Greeks. But in terms of who is showing up at somebody else's door and asking for land or whatever else, the shoe is definitely on the other foot now. And who's to say that Rutulian, or sorry, Turnus, the Rutulian prince and leader, isn't more deserving of the hand of Lavinia, a woman who we still don't know much about. We saw her a little bit in Book 7, consulting some oracles, and then we heard from her father a little bit, but she is still the stakes right now. Aeneas is supposed to be able to marry her. King Latinus was okay with that, but then Turnus and Juno and Alecto stirred up all that trouble, and now that is an issue where it wasn't necessarily before. So just real quick, and then I'll move on. But I just want to look at some of the points here. So I kind of already described the broad point of the first point the student is talking about. The second point is he's saying it's a similar kind of thing, that now the visiting Trojans are they're the invaders and not the defenders. And Diomedes and Odysseus had that night raid, and that, that was the Greek side doing that, right? Whereas now the Trojans are doing that in a similar way, which is just further evidence for the fact that the Trojans are now the new Greeks, which is definitely just a weird reversal in all sorts of ways. And then also, let's see, I'll just read this one. In the case of Turnus fighting against Aeneas, Turnus seems to partly be fighting for Lavinia, whom Aeneas took, or, his father kind of agreed to let Aeneas take. So this is like Turnus being Menelaus and Aeneas being Paris. So Aeneas is Paris in the situation, basically, which is totally true. It's this foreign actor coming in to try and take the hand in marriage of this woman who is from another place, in this case, Italy. And they're fighting for her. So, yeah, man, this is interesting. And we should think of this in our last couple of books leading up to the ending, because you might think you know how this is going to end, how, like, what we're headed towards, because it's been so heavily prophesized. At the end of the day, I suppose we know on some level the Italians will, or the Trojans rather, will come out on top by being blended with the Italians and becoming the Italians in a weird way. So that's slightly different than Iliad potentially. Uh, but yeah, so I'm just going to say what I'm trying to say is that the end of the poem, there is actually something interesting that we maybe aren't expecting, that we're going to have to dig a little deep into to understand in terms of the way recent scholarship has received it. There may or may not be a kind of weird twist to what Virgil is doing here, but this alone could point to something. What would Virgil be doing by making the Trojans be like the Greeks from the Trojan Wars? In the Trojan Wars, it was really morally ambiguous in terms of we didn't know what the quote unquote good guy was in terms of like modern entertainment for children, where there's always a clear cut good guy versus bad guy. Whereas in this poem, we definitely know that Aeneas and the Trojans are supposed to be the good guys. But if Virgil is trying to compare them to their previous bad guy, by comparing them to the Greeks or making them basically the Greeks, what's going on there? Is Virgil all into their attempt to colonize Italy, or does he have a critique of it? It's really worth thinking about because it will actually come up in a week or so. But anyway, I'm just going to go through these first few pages of this book and then read some poems, and then we'll be done. So at the beginning of this book, Jupiter convenes a meeting of the gods in Olympus. It's the first time we've seen them all interacting with each other in a little while. So it's this is kind of a trope that shows up in Homer, where we get the perspective of the gods in an extended way. That's what we're gonna get here, and he basically immediately launches into chastising everyone for participating in this conflict, which at this point it's still mostly been Juno with the help of Iris versus Venus. Um, but he's potentially blaming a lot of them. I suppose Vulcan has also had a role at this point as well in giving Aeneas that really awesome shield. And then Venus makes this desperate appeal She goes on, she says, I beg you, father, by the smoking wreck of Troy, let Ascanius at least have safe passage out of battle and spare my grandson. So she's really going on in this very desperate manner, saying, like, hey, like, if we're not going to get Italy, then so be it, but at least let my grandson live. She's like, for all I care, let Aeneas be cast out once again and wander looking for a new home because she seems resigned here and understands that Italy is it almost seems like a lost cause to her. But knowing the gods, we can't necessarily trust that she's being totally genuine here. So that she's better know to settle down on their country's dying ashes. She's saying like, just let them go back to Troy for all I care. I beg you, give them back their Xanthus, their Samos. Those were the rivers around Troy if these luckless Trojans must once more relive the fall of Troy. So even the gods are commenting on how this conflict really is like a second version of the Trojan War, though according to one of our students and me at this point, that dynamic is kind of reversed in a weird way. But yeah, do we think Venus is being totally straightforward here? I imagine that she, at this point, still would be willing to fight tooth and nail against any of Juno's machinations. And Juno claps back. She's saying like, "Hey, yeah, you can change their ships into sea nymphs to give them this like good omen when the Rutulians try to set them on fire. But if we, in our turn, offer the Latin side helping hand, is that such a horrid crime? Is that so bad? Aeneas knows nothing. The man is miles away, unknowing. Let him stay there." So that was picking up on something that Venus picked up on, which Aeneas is, he's still traveling around Italy trying to get all the help he can after leaving King Evander. And then Zeus chimes in and says, since it is not allowed that Latins and Trojans join in pacts of peace, and there is no end to your eternal clashes, now, whatever the luck of each man today, and whatever hope he follows, Trojan or Italian, I make no choice between them. Whether Italy's happy fate lays siege to the camp or the Trojans' folly, the dead prophecies they follow, nor do I exempt the Italians, how each man weaves his web will bring him to glory or to grief. King Jupiter is the king to all alike. The fates will find a way. And yeah, this is Jupiter. So he's saying he's going to be impartial. He's not going to pick sides here. This is similar and maybe also different at the same time to how he was in Iliad, where he would help out certain sides depending on which goddess had recently talked to him or which side needed to be swayed. Um, but it's also kind of similar to the way he is in Iliad. He took out that scale, the psychostasia, which allowed him to leave it to the fates. And so that's what he's saying he's going to do here, essentially, without actually going all out with the whipping out the scale and weighing their fortune. He's saying like I'm gonna leave it to them, and that he's going to be impartial. But of course, we know that that only means so much when Venus and Juno are still very much going to probably be helping the Trojans and or Rutulians in their own way. So thanks for a lot of nothing, I guess, Jupiter. All right, this last little thing we'll talk about is that Aeneas, like I said, he's still traveling around gathering allies. He seeks out King Tarchon, apparently, tells him his name and his stock and the help he needs. He tells him about Mezentius mustering fighters. And so you remember Mezentius is like he's like the second-hand man right now to Turnus in terms of them both being the bad guy. And then without delay, Tarchon joins forces at once and seals a pact. And so, free of fate's demand, he joins lots with Aeneas's people. And then at this bottom part, once again, we are drawing attention to the fact that this is a song, a quote unquote song, right? It's a poem, an epic poem. So Virgil directly addresses a muse, and they launch into an epic catalog of all the Italian allies helping out Aeneas. So it's not just going to be the Laurentian people from King Evander's territory. There's other people in the Italian peninsula who also have a bone to pick with the Rutulians and or are just willing to favor the Trojans over the native Latin people who are mustering against him, which is interesting. And this reminds us of the fact that we have a plot thread wherein Diomedes is going to be consulted at some point. And so that still has to come to a conclusion. The Rutulians are going to go talk to Diomedes. But anyway, they launch into this long catalog, which we've seen these catalogs before. We will talk about said catalog on Wednesday and get deeper into this book as Aeneas surely makes his way towards returning to the Trojan encampment, very similarly to Return of the King's style narrative going on there, Lord of the Rings. All right, I have one more thing to say about this poem that I forgot to mention. There's this really cool thing where the poet is super good about hitting 10 syllables each line, as is iambic pentameter is wont for you to do. But then towards the end, this fourth to last line, as far as I can tell, that is the only place where they actually hit 11 syllables. And it's kind of a cool line to do that with because the line goes, we can all have a little bit of downtime. So, literally, the word time is the word that pushes this line out from being just 10 syllables of pentameter to its pentameter that runs on a little long. And so, a word like downtime or time in general, for that to be an 11th syllable that sort of breaks the rhythm a little bit, that's kind of cool. Who knows if the poet fully thought that out, but that's beside the point, as we have found with poetry and art, is that whatever we interpret is potentially just as valid as what the poet intended. And that, I don't know, that's just really cool, man. Okay, I have a few more poems to share. All right, I'll read this and then I'll talk about it, but I already have the rhyme scheme up. The people locked shut in their gloomy houses, scared of the dead world struck, unwilling to kiss their spouses. The fear that rises dwindles our spirit, it always compromises our fated fight. This one's really cool. We have this nice little stanza that is very expressive considering its brevity. It follows this interesting rhyme scheme that's kind of two separate quatrains, if you want to think of it that way, A, B, A, B, and then C, D, C, E. But what we notice is that the C rhyme scheme that shows up in the fifth line, it kind of is doing an end rhyme with the old B rhyme scheme from the previous quatrain. So spouses, rises, compromises. That's very much end rhyme or slant rhyme and not exact rhyme. But in a way, it's making it to where this second quatrain is still kind of intermingled with the rhymes showing up in the first quatrain. And I don't know, I think that's pretty cool. I like it a lot. Yep, we have shorter lines in iambic pentameter, and it's a little more freeform this one. And that's really cool. There's still a lot going on, considering that it's not a set form. Okay, this one we have lines of tetrameter and trimeter, meaning 6 to 8 beat lines, and then we have a bit of okay. For one thing, this top one, somebody sent me a poem that their sibling actually wrote, and then they themselves, their poem is the second one. So I included the one from the sibling. It's pretty cool. Feel free to do that. Yeah, if you have like a really poetic relative or something who wants to share something right now, go ahead by all means. I really like the imagery of the one on the top, but I guess I'll just read the bottom one since that's by a student. And we have this nice, straightforward rhyme scheme going on here. So it's rushed away, always in a hurry, running away without worry, blurring past, never to last, as it shakes down small beauties and large to be found, to make one wonder why, for it never says goodbye. Okay, this is awesome. I like how this one's a little open ended. Interpreting exactly what the speaker is writing about is a little ambiguous, which is interesting. That it's kind of complex in that way. Um, and I also like that the lines start to get way shorter as it gets to this line, blurring past never to last as it shakes down. So those lines are the shorter ones in the entire poem, and it seems to be describing something that is dwindling. So we have uh, this what's the word? The fact that it's talking about something kind of dwindling down is coinciding with the fact that metrically the poem is getting dwindled down. It's getting more spare. And that is really cool. I love that. That's just, I don't know, it's really awesome. The first poem is about the difficulty in finding the right words to express any kind of reaction to something that is kind of surprising or unexpected, which that is super relevant. Okay, let's see. We have two more. One of them's really quick though, but this one's a little longer. And we have lots of tetrameter and we have lots of enjambment. I like the enjambment in this one. The first stanza is a bunch of in-stopped lines. Each line is in-stopped with a period and then a question mark. But then we get some enjambment in the middle of the second stanza, and we get a lot of in-stopped lines in the last stanza. So I guess I should say there's actually a lot of enjambment. A lot of in-stopped lines, and the enjambment is it kind of stands out because most of the lines are in-stopped. I'll read this. So what the virus is making me feel. My soul is draped in darkness. Oh, how my heart is shattered. The pain is too much to handle. Why can't this stop? I haven't seen the light in a long time. It is too dark staying inside. Please, why can't this stop and lead the way to happiness I crave? But this can't change as quick as day turns into night, and I'm standing here in such great sorrow and in such great fear. I don't know if this will ever disappear. Can we ever be normal again, or will we always live in fear? These are the questions I ask myself, and is what the virus makes me feel. Yeah, this is good. This is written from the perspective of it's a little more hopeless, a little more downtrodden, but can't blame that perspective. I think everybody, even if you're mostly more upbeat right now and enjoying some of the time off we have, this kind of interpretation of things is totally understandable. So yeah, there's that enjambment there in the second stanza. Please, why can't this stop? And that's kind of, I'm like literally just noticing this on the spot. But that's one of the few times where the line actually does not stop. It keeps going after that. That just ends in a comma, and it flows into the final line of that stanza. And so yeah, I mean that's a cool little metatextual thing going on there, where the poem's content is actually reflecting the grammatical aspect of the enjambment. That's awesome. And it does start to fall into a rhyme scheme right towards the end, which is kind of interesting. It's almost an Emily Dickinson esque rhyme scheme that kind of shows up out of what initially feels like something without rhyme scheme. So, yeah, people are experimenting with poetic form and hitting on all kinds of cool poetic um, devices. Okay, last one's real quick. It's kind of like a haiku variation. It's not actually 575, but it's similar to that. So doing work from home, staying away from stores all day, but going out when needed. I like this one because it feels kind of conceptual, and that's kind of another word for kind of experimental, or that there's like an idea behind it, there's a concept, because it feels like a fragment of a to-do list or a diary entry where we're just getting a little snatch of a kind of mundane uh, part of someone's day right now during this kind of interesting time. So yeah, that's cool. Yeah, hoping to actually see some haikus. I like the longer poems, but one or two haikus would be appreciated. But do whatever form speaks to you the most. All right, guys. I will talk to you on Wednesday. There will be parts of the form for today to submit your poem if you still haven't. You want to do it there, or you can email it to me. Maybe I'll put something on the forum for you guys to share any thoughts on recent books of Aeneid that you would potentially want me to share with everyone else. And then we'll go from there, but I'll see you on Wednesday, by which time you will have finished Book 10. Alright, guys.